The city of Chicago had always been the backdrop of Sophie Taylor's life. She'd grown up here, met her husband Tom here, and built a life together in the same bustling neighborhoods where she had once wandered aimlessly as a teenager. The city was a mix of opportunities, the endless hum of people on their way to somewhere, and Sophie, who at 37, felt as if she had lost a bit of herself somewhere along the way. Life had turned into a predictable routine. Wake up, get the kids ready for school, work her demanding job as an HR manager, come home to make dinner, and then wait for Tom to return from his long days at the office. She was living the American dream, or at least that's what it looked like from the outside. On paper, Sophie and Tom seemed like the perfect couple. They had met in college and had built a family with 2 children, Emily, 9, and Daniel, 6, and their house in a quiet suburban neighborhood was cozy, comfortable, and full of love. At least that's what Sophie wanted to believe. But something had been missing for a while. The connection she once felt with Tom had faded. The spark they had when they first met seemed like a distant memory. The chemistry, the passion, everything had slowly turned into routine. Tom had become more focused on his career, often working late into the night, leaving Sophie to take care of the household responsibilities. The weight of their everyday life began to feel heavier, and Sophie started to wonder if this was all there was. It was during a yoga class at the local gym that things began to change. Sophie had signed up a few weeks ago, mainly to get some time for herself, away from the kids, the house, and the monotony of her daily routine. She had noticed him the first day she walked in, Ryan Pierce. He was 28, fit, and had a relaxed, easygoing energy about him that made Sophie feel, for the first time in a long while, a little bit alive. Ryan's smile was disarming, and his charisma was undeniable. Sophie had never been the type to flirt, but with him it felt natural. He would crack jokes during class, and despite their age gap, they had great conversations after each session. Over the weeks, their bond deepened. Ryan started waiting for her after class, offering to grab a coffee, which Sophie reluctantly agreed to at first. But as the weeks went by, their connection seemed to grow. It wasn't just the physical attraction. Sophie enjoyed how he listened to her, how easy it was to talk to him. He made her laugh, something that had been rare in her life lately. She'd find herself thinking about him long after the yoga class ended. Sophie had become accustomed to Tom's silence in the evenings, and Ryan's energy was a breath of fresh air. One evening, as Sophie sat on her couch after putting the kids to bed, she received a text from Ryan. "Hey, Sophie, I was thinking about you. Want to grab a drink this weekend?" Sophie stared at the message, her heart racing. She didn't know why it had such an effect on her. Maybe it was the thrill of being wanted again, of feeling seen. She could hear Tom in the other room, clicking away on his laptop as he worked late again. Sophie glanced at her phone, fingers hovering over the keys. She was conflicted. She hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't crossed any lines, not yet. But the more she thought about Ryan, the more she felt an undeniable pull. "Sure, I'd like that." She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. The next few days felt like a whirlwind for Sophie. She hadn't realized how much she missed the idea of feeling desired, of having someone pay attention to her in a way that wasn't about chores or childcare. She and Ryan met for drinks on Saturday night at a bar downtown. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and it was easy to forget the world around her. They shared stories, laughed, and before she knew it, the night had turned into something more than just a casual meeting. Ryan walked her to her car, his hand brushing against hers, and Sophie felt a surge of excitement. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low and gentle. Sophie hesitated, the reality of what she was about to do hitting her. But the pull was too strong. She nodded, and before she knew it, his lips were on hers. It wasn't a reckless kiss. It was slow, deliberate, and filled with promise. Sophie felt her body respond in a way she hadn't in years. When they pulled apart, she was breathless, a wave of guilt washing over her. But Ryan only smiled. "I'll text you tomorrow," he said, before giving her a final, lingering kiss on the cheek. Sophie drove home in a daze, replaying the night over and over in her mind. She knew what she was doing was wrong, but at the same time, It felt like she was finally living again, something she hadn't felt in so long. When she walked in the door, she found Tom sitting in the living room, eyes glued to his laptop. He didn't even look up as she entered. Sophie had to force herself to smile, to act as if everything was normal. The weight of what she had done hung heavy on her shoulders, but she buried it deep inside. Tom would never suspect a thing, she convinced herself. But things took an unexpected turn the next day. Sophie had gone out with Ryan again, and this time they didn't just kiss. They spent the night together at a hotel, their bodies entwined in passion. It was exhilarating, freeing. But deep down, Sophie knew she was crossing a line she wouldn't be able to undo. The guilt was starting to creep in, but it was drowned out by the thrill of what she had just experienced. As she was leaving the hotel the next morning, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Tom. "Where are you? We need to talk." Her heart dropped. What did he know? How did he find out? Sophie's mind raced as she tried to think of a way to explain herself. As Sophie's phone buzzed again, her heart skipped a beat. It was Tom, asking where she was and what was going on. She couldn't hide the guilt that flooded her chest, but she quickly silenced the phone and took a deep breath. The night with Ryan kept replaying in her mind. She had never thought she'd get to this point, never imagined herself straying from her marriage. But here she was, caught between two lives. Sophie stared at the screen for a moment before typing a quick reply, trying to buy some time. "I'm just out with a friend. Be home in a bit, we'll talk then." She didn't know what she was going to say, but she had to face Tom. She had to come up with a story, something that would smooth things over, even though she knew deep down that the truth couldn't stay buried forever. She drove back home, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and guilt. The streets outside her window blurred as she sped through them, but nothing could erase the reality of what she had done. When she parked in the driveway, she hesitated for a moment, her hand gripping the door handle. She knew the conversation with Tom wouldn't be easy, but it was inevitable. Sophie had no idea how he might react, but she didn't think she could keep up the charade for much longer. The distance between them had been growing, and now it was as if an unspoken wall had risen between them. What had started out as a harmless flirtation had turned into something much deeper. And now, Sophie had to decide whether she was ready to face the consequences. She walked inside, finding Tom seated at the kitchen table, his laptop open in front of him. The moment she entered, he looked up, his eyes scanning her face as if trying to read her every emotion. Sophie tried to put on a brave face, but she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "Where were you?" Tom's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. "I've been waiting for you. We need to talk." Sophie swallowed hard, her mind racing for an excuse, but there was no turning back now. She took a seat across from him, forcing herself to meet his gaze. The silence between them felt like a chasm, each second growing heavier as Tom waited for her response. "I was just—" Sophie started, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't lie to him. Not anymore. She had made her decision, and she couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. "I was with Ryan," Sophie said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air between them, each one cutting through the fragile silence. Tom's face hardened, and for a moment, Sophie could have sworn she saw his anger flash across his features. But just as quickly it was gone, replaced by something colder, more controlled. "You're having an affair," Tom said simply. There was no accusation in his voice, just a statement of fact. It hurt Sophie more than she expected, hearing it come from him. But this wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything that had led them here. The years of neglect, the silent resentment that had festered between them, the emotional distance that neither of them had known how to close. "I didn't want it to happen," Sophie said, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't plan this, but I haven't felt alive in so long. I thought you might understand, or at least—" "At least what, Sophie?" Tom interrupted, his tone sharp now. "You thought I wouldn't care? You thought I wouldn't notice? We've been living like strangers for years, Sophie. You've been emotionally checked out long before you started meeting Ryan." Sophie's chest tightened as Tom's words hit her like a punch. She knew it was true. She had tried to keep up the appearances, tried to make things work by telling herself that they were just going through a rough patch. But the truth was, they hadn't really been together for a long time. They were two people living under the same roof, but neither of them was truly present in the other's life. Tom took a deep breath, running his hand through his hair. "I don't know how to process this," he said, his voice quieter now. "I don't even know who you are anymore, Sophie." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She had hurt him. She had hurt the person she had once loved so deeply. And now, the realization of that loss hit her hard. "I never meant to hurt you, Tom," Sophie said, her voice breaking.
I'm sorry.
"I never thought it would come to this. I didn't want it to be this way. But I've been lonely for so long. And Ryan, he made me feel seen again. He made me feel like I mattered." Tom didn't say anything for a long moment. He just stared at her, his eyes hard, as though he was processing everything she had said. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "I get it," Tom said.
Ido.
"I've been checked out too, in my own way. I've been focused on work, and I haven't been there for you. But an affair, Sophie? That's crossing a line. We can't come back from that. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." Sophie's heart sank. The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. She had known it wouldn't be easy, but hearing him say it out loud, hearing him tell her that he didn't know if he could ever forgive her, it felt like a betrayal, even though she was the one who had betrayed him. "I don't know if I can forgive myself," Sophie whispered, the tears falling freely now. "But I don't want to lose you, Tom. I don't want to throw everything away. We've been through so much together. I don't know what to do, but I want to try, if you're willing to try too." Tom stood up from the table, his expression unreadable. He walked to the window and stared out at the city lights for a long moment. Sophie waited, unsure of what would come next. Finally, Tom turned back to her, his face weary. "I don't know what the future holds, Sophie, but right now I need space. I can't deal with this all at once. I need time to think. We both do." Sophie nodded, wiping her tears. She didn't want to push him, but she couldn't help the desperate hope that things might somehow work out. Maybe they could find their way back to each other, even after everything that had happened. But for now, all she could do was give him the space he asked for, and hope that, in time, they would find a way to rebuild. As the days passed, Sophie found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. She still met Ryan, unable to let go of the connection she felt with him. But every moment she spent with him now felt tainted by the reality of what was happening at home. She couldn't escape the guilt, the ache in her chest every time she thought of Tom. She wasn't sure how much longer she could juggle both worlds. Something had to give. But as Sophie looked at the two men in her life, she realized that the choices she made now would determine everything. Would she choose the familiar safety of her marriage, or the thrilling uncertainty of what lay ahead with Ryan? And would Tom ever truly forgive her? If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. And make sure to subscribe for more updates and future videos. The tension in the house had been steadily building over the past few weeks. Every word Jack spoke seemed laced with suspicion. Every look he gave Linda more critical than the last. Linda could feel it, that coldness creeping into their home like a shadow that couldn't be shaken off. And while she tried to maintain her composure, there was a gnawing sense of unease that settled deep within her gut. It wasn't just the affair anymore. It wasn't even just about the physical intimacy that had been lost between them. What truly hurt was the way Jack had retreated, emotionally closed off, and turned distant, as if her affair had built an unbridgeable gap between them. And to make matters worse, the fact that Jack had seemingly moved on with his assistant, Willow, cut deeper than anything Linda had imagined. It was one thing to live in denial. It was another to see your spouse actively forging a new connection. The day it all reached its breaking point came unexpectedly. Linda had been planning to meet Ben again, the man who had brought back a spark in her life. She told herself time and time again that she wasn't doing anything wrong. Jack had crossed a line first, hadn't he? But still, the guilt would always find its way back to her. It wasn't just about the physical attraction to Ben anymore. There was something about the way Ben made her feel alive, desired, special. that Linda hadn't felt in years. And maybe, just maybe, she thought that she could make it all work. Ben on the side, Jack at home, and a life that wasn't defined by bitterness or stagnation. But today was different. The night before, Jack had been cold, shut off emotionally, distant as usual. And when Linda woke up, she was already bracing herself for another round of avoidance. He hadn't even kissed her goodbye. He'd just left for work in silence. As the hours passed, Linda could feel the tension mounting. She couldn't just let it sit any longer. She needed to confront Jack, to get some sort of closure on their broken relationship. To her surprise, Jack came home earlier than usual that evening. His face grim, his body stiff with frustration. Linda watched him carefully, wondering if tonight would be the night everything changed. "Jack," she began, trying to find the right words. "We need to talk. We can't keep doing this. We can't keep living in this house pretending nothing's wrong." Jack didn't respond right away, his eyes drifting to the floor. Linda could tell he was trying to keep his anger in check. Finally, he looked up at her, his voice low and bitter. "Is this about your boyfriend again?" he asked, his words cutting through the air like a blade. Linda's heart skipped a beat. There it was again, the accusation. He always had a way of bringing up Ben in a way that made her feel guilty, as though her entire world revolved around him. "Jack, I'm not doing this to hurt you. You know that, right? I'm not trying to replace you. But I need something. I need to feel wanted, to feel alive again." Jack's eyes flashed with anger. But there was something else there too. Hurt. His face softened for just a moment, before hardening once more. "What about me, Linda? What about us? Did you ever think that maybe I don't feel needed either? You've been going behind my back for months now, and you think I'm just supposed to sit here and be okay with it?" Linda tried to find the words to explain herself, to make Jack understand, but nothing she said seemed to land. Every time she thought they were getting closer to a resolution, Jack would pull away again, like a rope being tugged in two different directions. She knew he was hurt, and deep down so was she. This was not the life either of them had imagined for their marriage. "Jack, Linda began, but she was interrupted by a knock at the door. She froze, her heart pounding. Who could it be? "Who's that?" Jack asked, the suspicion returning in his voice. "More lies, Linda?" Linda stood up quickly, her heart racing as she approached the door. She knew exactly who it was. It was Ben. He had come by unannounced to check on her, just like he always did. She opened the door, and before she could say anything, Ben stepped in, a warm smile on his face. "Hey, Linda, I didn't want to disturb you, but I thought I'd check if you were still." His words trailed off as he saw Jack standing in the hallway, his arms crossed, a look of quiet fury on his face. "Who's this?" Jack demanded, his tone hard. He was no longer trying to keep his anger hidden. The confrontation was happening, whether Linda was ready for it or not. Ben's smile faltered slightly, but he stood his ground. "I'm Ben," he said simply, extending his hand. "Linda and I've been spending some time together." Jack didn't take his hand. Instead, he stepped forward, his voice low and cold. "Is this what you've been doing, Linda? While I've been working late, while I've been trying to fix this? You've been out here with him, living this fantasy?" The tension in the room was suffocating, and Linda could feel the weight of Jack's words pressing down on her. She wasn't sure what she expected when she opened the door, but she didn't think it would escalate like this. Ben, ever the calm one, glanced between them before speaking. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble," Ben said, looking directly at Jack. "I didn't know you two were." "Shut up," Jack barked, cutting him off. "You think I don't know what's going on here? I've seen the signs. I know you're here for more than just coffee and casual chats. So, why don't you just get out of my house?" Linda's stomach turned. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't the confrontation she had prepared for. But as she stood there watching the two men, one her husband and the other the man she was falling for, she realized something. This wasn't just about the affair. It wasn't about the physical intimacy, the lies, or the betrayal. It was about the choices they had all made, the paths they had taken, and how far they were willing to go to make things right. The silence in the room was deafening. Jack's gaze never left Ben, his fists clenched at his sides. Linda stood frozen, her heart beating in her throat. She could feel the walls closing in around her, and suddenly, she wasn't sure what to do anymore. "I don't want to fight," Linda finally said, her voice soft but firm. "But this is my life, Jack. This is my decision, and I won't apologize for it." Jack's eyes burned with hurt and anger, and for a moment, Linda thought he might say something that would tear them apart for good. But instead, he just turned away, heading toward the door. "Fine," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "You want him, you can have him." And with that, Jack left, slamming the door behind him. Linda stood there, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure if this was the end, or if it was just another chapter in their complicated, broken story. Now, that was a pivotal moment. The conflict has reached its boiling point, and the question is, where will this relationship go from here? Linda has made her choice, but at what cost? Will Jack walk away? Or is there more to this story? As Linda stood in the empty house, the sound of Jack's departure still echoing in her mind, she couldn't help but feel a complex mix of relief and guilt. The confrontation had escalated quickly, and while she had stood her ground, something inside her told her this was only the beginning of what would be a much longer journey. Jack's words stung, especially the way he dismissed her choices so easily, as if she were just a passing phase. She could feel her chest tightening with the weight of what had just happened. It wasn't just the end of an argument. It was the end of their marriage as they knew it. Linda knew it deep down, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the full impact of her decisions. For years, she had put herself second, always playing the role of the supportive wife, the dedicated partner, the person who would always sacrifice her own needs for the sake of the relationship. But now, as the dust settled from the fight, she wondered, was this really the right choice? Could she live with the consequences? Was she willing to give up the stability, the comfort, and the security of her marriage for a fleeting moment of passion with Ben? The sharp knock on the door pulled her out of her thoughts. She froze. Who could it be now? Jack had left, and it wasn't like he was coming back anytime soon. But when she opened the door, she saw Ben standing there, looking unexpectedly nervous. "Hey," he said softly, looking past her into the house, as if trying to assess the damage from what had just unfolded. "I heard the yelling. Is everything okay?" Linda stepped aside, allowing him to come in, but her mind was still racing. She didn't want to bring Ben into this mess. She needed to process everything, to figure out what she wanted and where she stood, but her body was already reacting to his presence. I don't know," she said, her voice faltering as she led him inside. "Things are a little complicated right now." Ben followed her into the living room, his gaze soft but steady. "Look, we don't have to do anything right now. I just wanted to check in. I care about you, Linda." She shook her head, pacing slightly. "I know. I care about you too, but everything is just falling apart. I don't even know what's real anymore." Ben stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "I'm here, okay? Whatever you decide, I'll be here for you." For a moment, Linda felt comforted, like she could lean on Ben, but then she remembered Jack and the pain of their conversation. She pulled away from his touch, not wanting to be unfair to either of them. "I don't know if I'm ready to make any decisions yet," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I need to think. I need time." Ben nodded, understanding the weight of what she was going through. "I get it. You're not alone in this, Linda. Take all the time you need. But know that I'm not going anywhere." She gave him a small, grateful smile, but inside, she was torn. The emotional turmoil of the day was overwhelming. The connection she had with Ben was undeniable, but Jack's departure, his final cold words, had left her reeling. Could she really leave him for good? Was it worth it to pursue something with Ben, especially when the stakes were so high? As the night wore on, Linda sat alone in the living room, the silence pressing in on her. She hadn't heard from Jack. She wasn't sure if she even wanted to. The phone sat on the coffee table, taunting her with its stillness. She picked it up a few times, ready to dial his number. But each time, her finger hovered over the screen, unsure of what to say. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation she'd had with Jack earlier. His pain was obvious, but so was her own. She had crossed a line, and it felt impossible to turn back now. And yet, part of her wanted to make it work, to repair what had been broken between them, to find a way to salvage their relationship. But at what cost? She asked herself again. Could she really keep living a double life, juggling Ben and Jack, constantly hiding her true feelings, constantly pretending things were fine? Finally, around midnight, Linda made a decision. She texted Jack, telling him they needed to talk, that it was urgent. She didn't expect an immediate response, but a part of her hoped for one. She sat there for what felt like hours, the silence of the house closing in around her. Just as she was about to give up, the phone buzzed. It was a message from Jack. "Fine. Let's talk tomorrow. But I'm not coming back tonight. I need space." Linda read the message, her heart sinking. It wasn't what she had hoped for, but it was something. She knew she had to face this head-on. She had to figure out what she wanted, not just for herself, but for everyone involved. The next morning, Linda stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She had made her decision. It was time to finally confront Jack and make it clear that she wasn't going to let this marriage fall apart without a fight. She wasn't going to give up on what they had without trying, even if that meant facing the truth about her affair with Ben. When she arrived at Jack's office later that day, she was ready. Her hands were clammy, her heart racing, but she was determined. She had no idea what would happen after this conversation, but she knew it was the only way forward. She took the elevator up to the 7th floor, her stomach tight with nerves. As she stepped out, she saw Jack waiting by his office door, his posture tense, his face hard to read. "Jack," she said softly, taking a step toward him. "We need to talk. No more running away from this." Jack's gaze flicked to hers, but he didn't move. His eyes were cold, but there was something else there. Something softer beneath the anger and hurt. "Linda," he said finally, his voice low, "I don't know what to say anymore." She met his eyes, feeling the weight of their history between them. "I know, but we have to figure this out. We can't keep going like this. I don't want to lose you." Jack sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of their situation was finally catching up with him. "I don't know if we can fix this, Linda. Not with everything that's happened." Tears welled up in Linda's eyes as she stepped closer. "We can. We just have to be honest with each other. About everything. No more secrets." Jack looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but we do it my way. No more Ben. I can't do this anymore." And just like that, the words hung in the air. Linda felt a deep sense of uncertainty, but there was something else too. A spark of hope that, despite everything, maybe they could rebuild. The air between Linda and Jack seemed to grow thicker with every word they spoke. Standing in his office, just a few feet apart, they both felt the weight of their shared history, the memories of better days, clashing with the reality of where they were now. The tension was almost palpable, but neither of them could back down now. They had to face the truth, no matter how difficult it was. Jack finally broke the silence, his voice steady but tinged with bitterness. "You want to fix this, Linda? Do you really think it can be fixed after everything? After you've been with Ben? After you chose him over me?" Linda felt her chest tighten. She had expected this, of course, but hearing it from Jack, in that flat, detached tone, stung more than she had anticipated. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing, but the weight of the situation was suffocating. She had betrayed him, and now she was asking for him to understand, to accept her choices. "I'm sorry, Jack," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was doing what I needed to feel alive again. But I was wrong. I should have talked to you, should have told you what I was feeling. I was selfish." Jack shook his head, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Selfish? Yeah. I've been feeling like a stranger in my own house for months. And now you want me to just forget everything? Just pretend this never happened. His voice rose slightly, his anger building. Linda felt the heat of his words, and for a moment, she thought about walking away. Maybe this was too much, maybe it was too late to save anything. But then she thought about what they had shared, the years they had spent together, and how much she still loved him. She couldn't give up now. Jack, I didn't want to hurt you, I swear I didn't. I've been thinking about this nonstop, and I know what I did was wrong. But I need you to understand. I need you to see that I'm trying here. I'm trying to make this work. The words hung in the air between them, but Jack didn't immediately respond. Instead, he stared at her, his eyes dark with the weight of his own pain. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a mixture of hurt, disbelief, and maybe even a hint of fear. Linda stepped closer, trying to close the distance between them. But Jack held up his hand, stopping her in her tracks. Don't come any closer. I don't know if I can do this anymore. Linda recoiled slightly, the sting of his words cutting deeper than she cared to admit. Her mind raced, this was it. She had to make her stand now, or everything they had would slip through her fingers forever. She took a deep breath and forced herself to speak calmly, even though every fiber of her being wanted to shout, to beg him to forgive her. I know I messed up, but please, Jack, please don't give up on us. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose everything we've built. Jack looked at her for a long moment, his gaze unwavering, but there was no warmth in his eyes. It's not just about losing what we built, Linda. It's about trust. You've shattered that, and I'm not sure how to get it back. How can I believe that this isn't just the start of a pattern? That you won't keep going behind my back, doing whatever you want? The raw pain in his voice hit her harder than she expected. She had wanted this conversation to be about healing, about rebuilding, but instead, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of everything they had once been. She had crossed a line, and now she was paying the price. But she refused to give up without a fight. She reached out, her voice soft but firm. I know I messed up, Jack, but I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that I can make this right. Please. Jack stood there for what felt like an eternity, and for a moment, Linda feared he might walk away, just like he had earlier. But then, finally, he sighed heavily, rubbing his hand over his face. Fine, he muttered, his voice tired. But if we're going to try, it can't just be about you and me. I need to know that you're going to cut things off with Ben. This thing you've got with him, it has to end. If you're serious about saving this, you have to choose Linda. Me or him. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Linda felt her heart race. She had always known that this moment would come, but hearing it spoken aloud made it all too real. She thought of Ben, of the passion, the excitement, the freedom he gave her. And then she thought of Jack, the man she had spent 25 years with, the man she still loved despite everything. For a moment, everything seemed to blur. She wasn't sure what to say or how to respond. She had never been asked to choose between the two of them, and now the weight of that choice felt unbearable. I need time, Linda said, her voice shaky. I need to figure this out. I can't just make this decision on the spot, Jack. Jack stared at her, his face hardening. You don't need time, Linda. You've already made your choice. And now you have to live with the consequences. The words hit her like a slap. She had been living in denial, telling herself that she could somehow have both. A life with Jack and an affair with Ben. But now, Jack was forcing her to face the truth. There was no room for both. She couldn't have both worlds. She nodded, though her heart felt heavy. She had known this moment was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. I understand, she whispered. Jack turned away, his back to her as he walked toward the door. I'll be at the office, he said curtly, his voice flat. Linda watched him go, her chest tightening as the door closed behind him. She was left standing there, feeling both defeated and determined. She knew the next few days, weeks, maybe, would be the hardest of her life. But she also knew that she had made her choice. She had to face the consequences of her actions, no matter how painful they might be. As she sat down on the couch, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her hands shaking as she read the message from Ben.
I miss you.
Can we meet tonight? Her heart skipped a beat. She had told Jack she would cut things off with Ben. But now, the pull of the other man, the excitement of being with someone who made her feel alive, was too strong to ignore. Linda sat there, staring at her phone for a long moment, caught between two worlds. She had promised Jack, but could she really walk away from what she had with Ben? The question lingered in the air, and Linda knew it was only a matter of time before she would have to make a decision that would change everything. Linda sat frozen, staring at the message on her phone. Ben's text was short, but it sent a jolt through her chest.
I miss you.
Can we meet tonight? The words echoed in her mind, reminding her of the pull she still felt toward him. The excitement, the newness. It had all felt like a fresh start when things at home had begun to feel suffocating. But now, standing there in the aftermath of her confrontation with Jack, the weight of her choices pressed down on her shoulders. She couldn't ignore the reality of what Jack had said. It wasn't just about their marriage anymore. She couldn't pretend that her connection with Ben didn't have consequences. The affair wasn't just a fleeting escape. It was a part of her now, woven into the fabric of her days. But so was her life with Jack, no matter how broken it had become. She had promised Jack that she would make a choice, and now that moment had arrived. She knew she couldn't keep living in this limbo, juggling two lives and pretending it wouldn't eventually unravel. She had to choose. The question was, could she really walk away from what she had with Ben, especially now when it felt like she was so close to something real and passionate? Linda's phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. Another message from Ben. I'm waiting for you. Her heart raced, and a wave of guilt washed over her. She had already agreed to try and fix things with Jack, to make their marriage work again. But could she do that if she continued seeing Ben? The moment was like a tightrope walk, each step a delicate balance between her past with Jack and her present with Ben. The world outside felt blurry, like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure if she should take the plunge or walk away from everything. Later that evening, Linda found herself pacing in their living room, her thoughts a whirlwind. She knew what she had to do. She had to be honest with herself. And with Jack. The affair with Ben had made her feel alive. Yes, but it had also clouded her judgment. She had betrayed the trust that had once been the foundation of her marriage. It wasn't fair to Jack to keep dragging this on, especially when he had made it clear he was reaching his breaking point. Jack. The thought of him stirred something deep within her. She could still remember the early days of their relationship, the way he had looked at her with such warmth, the way they had shared their lives without hesitation. What had happened to that connection? Had it all faded beyond repair? Linda grabbed her coat from the chair, feeling a sense of resolve settling in her chest. Tonight she would make things right. She wouldn't meet Ben. She would talk to Jack, truly talk to him. She had avoided this conversation for far too long, hiding behind her affair, pretending it was just a distraction. But it wasn't. It was a reflection of something deeper, something she had been avoiding. And now it was time to face it. She stepped out of the house, her heart heavy but determined. The car ride to Jack's office felt like an eternity. She knew this conversation would be the hardest of her life, but she couldn't let things fester any longer. When she arrived, Jack's office was still lit up, even though it was late. She stepped inside without knocking, a quiet resolve in her movements. Jack looked up from his desk, his eyes weary but sharp. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her with a quiet intensity, waiting for her to speak. Linda took a deep breath, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I need to talk to you, Jack, about everything. I can't keep pretending like this is okay anymore. Jack's brow furrowed, and he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. What's this about now, Linda? You've made it clear where you stand. I know I have, she said quietly, stepping further into the room. But I don't think I fully understood what I was doing, Jack. I've been so wrapped up in my own hurt, my own need for something different, that I never stopped to think about what this was doing to you, to us. Jack didn't respond at first, just let her words sink in. The silence in the room stretched on, but Linda didn't look away. She had to face this head-on, no more hiding. I've been selfish, she continued. her voice breaking slightly. "And I'm so sorry for the pain I've caused you. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could keep everything separate. But now I see it's not that simple. This isn't just about me. It's about us. And I don't want to lose you, Jack. I still love you." Jack's eyes softened, just for a moment. But then they hardened again. "You love me, but you've been with him. How does that work, Linda? How can you claim to love me when you've been so willing to break us apart?" "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I felt like I was drowning. And then Ben came along, and for the first time in so long I felt seen. I felt alive. But I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I wasn't thinking about you." Jack stood up from his desk, his movements slow and deliberate. "So what now, Linda? You've had your fun, but you're here telling me you want to fix things? How does that even work? How can I trust you again after everything?" Linda took a deep breath, wiping away a stray tear. She didn't have an answer for that. Not yet. But she had to try, even if it meant starting from nothing. "I'm asking for a chance, Jack. Just a chance to prove that I can make it right. I know it won't be easy. I know it might take time. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I can't erase what happened, but I want to try to rebuild what we had. Can you give me that?" Jack's expression remained unreadable as he stepped closer to her. For a long moment, they just stood there, facing each other, the weight of their past hanging between them. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice quieter now, the anger giving way to something else. "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. But maybe we can try. Maybe we can start over, but it's going to take time. And I need you to be patient with me, just like I need to be patient with you." Linda nodded, her heart swelling with both relief and fear. This wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in months, she felt like there might be a chance for them. A chance to rebuild the trust, the love, the connection that had once been there. "I'll wait for you, Jack," she said softly. "I'll wait as long as it takes." Linda stood at the doorway of their home, staring out at the familiar view of the garden, the one Jack had planted for her on their first anniversary. The soft rustle of leaves in the wind seemed almost like a whisper, a quiet reminder of the love they had shared long ago. The house was still the same, but everything had changed. Everything between them had changed. The conversation they'd had the night before was still fresh in her mind. Jack's words had been sharp, but there was something in his eyes that had softened her resolve. He had agreed to try even if he wasn't sure how things would work. It was the first time in months that they'd agreed on something. And for Linda, that small spark of hope was enough to push her forward. Over the past week, things had been better. Not perfect, not yet, but better. They had spent more time together, had shared meals without the cold silence that had filled their home for so long. It wasn't the intimacy they once had, but it was something. A step forward, maybe. But Linda knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. She had a lot to prove, not just to Jack, but to herself. She'd spent so much time convincing herself that she wasn't the problem, that Jack's distance was the issue. But now, standing in the quiet of their home, she realized the truth. She had to take responsibility for what she'd done. She couldn't hide behind excuses anymore. The next few months were a blur of ups and downs, small victories, and painful realizations. Linda focused on rebuilding her marriage with Jack, taking it one day at a time. She stopped seeing Ben. The excitement she had once felt for him slowly faded, replaced by the quiet, everyday moments with Jack that she had almost forgotten. They went to therapy together, talked about their fears and frustrations, and slowly began to trust each other again. Jack, for his part, was cautious but willing. There were days when the anger resurfaced, and Linda had to remind him that she was committed to changing, to making things right. The trust wasn't there yet, but they were working on it. And sometimes that was enough. One evening, as they sat on the porch, drinking wine and watching the sunset, Jack reached over and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to Linda. She squeezed his hand, her heart full of gratitude and hope. "I don't know where we'll be in a year," Jack said quietly, his voice steady but unsure. "But I want to keep trying. I don't know if things will ever be like they were, but maybe Maybe they'll be better. Different, but better. Linda smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She didn't know if things would ever be perfect, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like they were heading in the right direction. "I'm willing to try, Jack," she replied, her voice soft but sure. "I'm here, and I'll keep trying, every day." They sat in comfortable silence, the world outside slowly darkening as the stars began to twinkle above them. It felt like the first real moment of peace they'd shared in a long time, and for that, Linda was thankful. A few months later, Linda found herself at a crossroads again. She had healed some of the wounds between her and Jack, but she was still haunted by the choices she had made, the mistakes she couldn't undo. She had stopped seeing Ben, but that chapter of her life lingered in her thoughts. She had learned that running away from her problems, whether through an affair or anything else, never led to happiness. True happiness, she realized, came from facing her fears and making the hard choices. One evening, after a long day of work, Linda sat in the living room, a cup of tea in hand, reflecting on everything that had happened. Jack had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long week. As she sipped the warm tea, she realized how much had changed, how far she'd come. She had learned to be honest with herself, to confront the discomfort, the pain, the guilt, and the fear that had driven her actions. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when the past seemed to creep up on her. But she knew that this was the path to healing. This was the path to something new. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if Jack and she would ever fully restore their marriage or if they'd remain two people living in the same house, learning to live with their choices. But for the first time in a long time, Linda felt hopeful. She felt like she had a future to look forward to, not one built on lies and guilt, but on honesty and a commitment to change. As she finished her tea, Linda took one last look around the room. It wasn't perfect, but it was home, and that was enough. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, make sure to hit that like button, share with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. I've got some exciting content coming up, and I can't wait to share it with all of you. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from you. Until next time.